I survived 3 tank hits in World War II. For most soldiers in World War II, the battlefield was a terrifying landscape of chaos and chance. It was a world of mud-soaked foxholes, deafening artillery barrages, and the constant, gnawing fear of a death that could arrive from any direction at any second. But for a select few, the war was not fought in the open. It was experienced from within a 7 by 9-foot steel box, a cramped and clamorous world, rumbling on 2 churning metal tracks. This box was both a fortress and a potential tomb, a weapon of immense, earth-shaking power, and yet a fragile shell against the enemy's ever-evolving arsenal of destruction. For Walter Stitt, Jr., a young man from the hills of West Virginia, serving in the U.S. Army's 3rd Armored Spearhead Division, the inside of an M4 Sherman tank was his entire world, a world that would be violently, catastrophically ripped apart, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. He cheated death again and again, crawling from the burning, twisted wreckage of his armored homes while the war raged unabated around him. His journey was a recurring nightmare of fire, smoke, and shattered steel. He saw comrades, men he had shared stale rations and whispered stories with just hours before, perish in an instant of blinding flame and contorted metal. These were men who had become his brothers, bonded by the unique and claustrophobic intimacy of a 5-man tank crew, where every man's life depended utterly on the others. This isn't just a story of survival against odds that seem mathematically impossible. It's the story of the profound psychological toll of being a constant, high-priority target, of the grim and accelerated transformation from a boy into a hardened soldier, and of the unseen, deeply etched scars carried by those who lived through the crucible of armored warfare. This is the incredible story of Walter Stitt, Jr. The fear inside a tank isn't just about the enemy you can see through a narrow periscope or gun sight. It's about the one you can't. It's the sudden, high-pitched whine of an incoming shell that's already in the air, a sound that gives you no time to react, only a split second to comprehend your fate. It's the brutal, deafening metallic clang that tells you you've been hit, a sound so violent it feels less like a noise and more like a physical blow to the entire world. And then comes the sudden, searing heat that follows a penetration, the smell of burning paint and acrid smoke that signals the beginning of the end. Historical accounts of armored combat and the memoirs of the men who fought in them reveal that the psychological impact of surviving a tank burnout was devastating. It was an experience so traumatic that it was widely believed most men could only endure it 2 or 3 times before their spirit broke completely. Walter Stitt, Jr. would have to endure 3. Each time his steel sanctuary was violated, he was violently ejected into the raw chaos of a live battlefield. A lone, disoriented figure, often with no weapon, running for his life under a hail of enemy fire. His harrowing journey through the bloody battlefields of France and Belgium would test the very limits of human endurance, luck, and the will to live. Walter Stitt, Jr. was born in Marietta, Ohio, and grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, during the suffocating grip of the Great Depression, a time of scarcity and hardship that shaped a generation with a deep-seated resilience and an unwavering sense of duty. When the shocking news of the attack on Pearl Harbor crackled over the radio on December 7, 1941, plunging the United States into the greatest conflict in human history, an 18-year-old Walter, who had graduated high school just months before, knew what he had to do. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in March 1943, ready to do his part. His father, a veteran of the Great War, who had seen firsthand the horrors of industrial warfare and the ravages of the Spanish flu on soldiers, was deeply unhappy with his son's decision. He knew all too well the horrors that likely awaited him. Walter, having some experience as a truck driver before the war, made a specific and unusual request when he was being assigned his role. He didn't want anything with a steering wheel. In a moment of what he would later call ironic humor, the assigning officer, noting his civilian driving record, sent him directly to an armored unit. After all, tanks didn't have steering wheels, they were guided by two levers. He was dispatched to the sprawling, humid training grounds of Fort Polk, Louisiana, where he was introduced to the workhorse of the American Armored Forces, the M4 Sherman tank. It was here, in the muggy heat and red dirt, that he, along with thousands of other determined young men, was forged into a tanker. He became a member of a tight-knit, five-man crew who would live, eat, sleep, and fight together in the cramped, grease-scented confines of their 33-ton machine. The crew was a specialized, interdependent organism. It consisted of a commander, the tank's brain and leader, a gunner, who aimed and fired the main cannon, a driver, who wrestled the massive vehicle across the battlefield, a bow gunner, who operated a forward-facing machine gun and the radio, and a loader. This was to be Walter's first role. Loader for E Company of the 33rd Armored Regiment, part of the famed 3rd Armored Spearhead Division. Life as a loader was a strange, almost disembodied experience of combat. Tucked inside the turret, shielded from a direct view of the outside world, Walter's reality was a blur of violent motion and a constant symphony of mechanical noise. His job was physically demanding and had to be executed with a precise, almost robotic rhythm. Listen for the gunner's command, grab the correct type of 75mm shell, be it armor-piercing for enemy tanks, high explosive for infantry and gun emplacements, or white phosphorus for smoke screens, and with a powerful, practiced motion, slam it into the breech of the main gun. He had to anticipate the gunner's needs, maintaining a steady flow of ammunition while the tank bucked and jolted over the unforgiving terrain, the roar of its engine a constant companion. He rarely saw the targets his tank was engaging. His view of the war was limited to a small, narrow periscope, and the battle was mostly an auditory and sensory experience. The commander's sharp, crackling commands in his headset, the deep-throated roar of the right radial engine, the thunderous, concussive report of their own gun firing, and the chilling, metallic rain of enemy machine gun fire peppering their armor like deadly hail. The M4 Sherman, for all its strengths in reliability and numbers, was a crowded and inherently dangerous place. The specter of a fire and the desperate need to escape was a constant, nagging worry for every crewman. The driver and bow gunner in the hull had their own hatches, but the three men in the turret, the commander, gunner, and loader, had only one primary escape hatch located on top of the turret. For the loader, like Walter, getting out in an emergency meant a frantic, desperate scramble under the massive, hot, and recoiling guard of the main gun to have any chance at reaching safety. This steel shell was their protector, but it was also a magnet for German anti-tank guns and the dreaded, heavily armored Tiger and Panther tanks. The American tankers had a morbid gallows humor nickname for their own Shermans, Ronsons, after the popular cigarette lighter because of their perceived tendency to catch fire when hit. While post-war analysis shows this was often due to ammunition storage rather than the gasoline engine, the fear of being burned alive was a constant, visceral terror for every crewman. In the summer of 1944, a few weeks after the momentous D-Day landings, Walter Stitt Jr. and the 3rd Armored Division arrived on the shores of France. He was no longer a trainee in Louisiana. He was a combat replacement, a fresh face stepping into a war that was already in full brutal swing. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a labyrinth of death, and his first assignment as a loader placed him directly into the path of a German army that, despite being in retreat, was still a formidable and deadly foe. The rolling hills and dense ancient hedgerows of Normandy would be his baptism by fire, and the steel walls of his Sherman would soon prove to be terrifyingly, fatally fragile. Combat in the Normandy countryside, the notorious bocage, was a brutal, grinding affair. The ancient hedgerows, thick, tangled walls of earth and vegetation, turned the landscape into a maze of death traps, perfect for concealed anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust-wielding infantry. As part of the Spearhead Division, the 3rd Armored was often at the very forefront of the Allied advance, tasked with punching holes in the German lines. For Walter, the rhythm of battle was dictated by the terse, urgent commands snapping through the intercom in his headset. "Gunner, traverse right. Target is anti-tank gun, 2 o'clock. Fire!" Then came Walter's part. A blur of practiced motion. He'd grab a heavy, high-explosive round, shove it home into the breech, and yell up into his microphone, signaling the gun was loaded and ready. The entire tank would shudder violently, filling the cramped turret with the sharp, acrid smell of cordite. Seconds later, the cycle would begin again, a relentless, deafening loop of destruction. On September 19th, 1944, as the division pushed onward after the breakout from Normandy, Walter's unit found itself locked in a particularly fierce battle. The fighting was so intense that the coaxial machine gun, mounted alongside the main cannon, overheated from continuous firing and jammed solid. The air inside the turret, already thick with smoke and tension, grew heavier. Through his small periscope, Walter caught a terrifying, heart-stopping glimpse of a German shell streaking past their turret, a near miss that left the crew's ears ringing. Radio calls crackled with warnings. They were being targeted, bracketed by an unseen enemy gunner. For a few fatal seconds, the tank commander, a young lieutenant new to the front, seemed paralyzed by the sheer intensity of the fight around them. Finally, the lieutenant's strained, high-pitched voice came over the intercom. "Back up! Back up!" But it was far too late. A deafening, world-shattering explosion rocked the Sherman. It felt less like a sound and more like a giant, invisible steel fist had smashed into their world, lifting the tank and throwing it sideways. An armor-piercing German round had found its mark, crashing through the turret armor with unstoppable force. The impact was catastrophic. The shell tore through the interior, and in a sickening instant, both the gunner and the tank commander were killed. The aftermath was pure, unadulterated horror. In the smoky, ringing silence that followed the blast, Walter looked up to see that the 2 dead crewmen had fallen in a way that completely blocked the turret's only escape hatch. Walter was trapped inside a steel coffin, the smell of death and burning electronics filling his nostrils. He knew with chilling certainty that another shell could follow at any second to finish the job. His training, drilled into him relentlessly, took over his body. He scrambled forward over the commander's lifeless form, squeezing his way down into the driver's compartment below. Just as he reached the front of the tank, a second German round struck home, and the Sherman erupted in a volcano of flames. He saw the driver's hatch was thrown open, a small, square portal to survival. Without a second thought, he dove headfirst out of the burning tank, landing hard on the torn-up earth and jamming his shoulder. The world outside, however, was no sanctuary. He was on foot, unarmed, and in the middle of a live fire zone. As he ran desperately for cover, he tripped and fell into a tangle of barbed wire, feeling a searing hot pain in his leg from shrapnel. Bleeding, disoriented, and deafened, he spotted another Sherman nearby and staggered towards it, his only thought to get a bandage for his leg. He yelled up to the crew, and a hand cautiously emerged from the commander's hatch holding a first aid dressing, but the crewman wouldn't expose himself to the ongoing fire to throw it down. Walter, adrenaline pumping, had no choice but to climb the side of the moving tank to get it. As he clung to the hull, a German submachine gun opened up, and a burst of fire clattered against the steel plate right next to his head, the impacts sending sparks flying. From his terrifyingly exposed position, Walter spotted him, the enemy soldier, tucked under a nearby bush. He screamed the location to the crew inside the tank he was clinging to. The Sherman's turret slowly, deliberately turned, its main gun lowered, and a single high-explosive shell obliterated the bush and the German soldier with it. Shaken, wounded, and having just witnessed the violent deaths of two of his crewmates, Walter was now a survivor. In the relentless logic of the U.S. Army in 1944, however, there was little time for recovery or grief. Tanks were valuable, but experienced crewmen were even more so. Within 24 hours, Walter Stitt Jr. was assigned to a new Sherman, a new crew, and a new role. The Army needed a gunner. His time as a semi-blind participant in battle was over. Now he would be the one and looking through the crosshairs, the one pulling the trigger. The promotion from loader to gunner was a profound psychological shift. As a loader, Walter had been a vital cog in a machine, feeding the gun without seeing the direct, bloody consequences of his actions. Now, sitting in the gunner's seat, the war unfolded directly in front of him, framed and magnified by the crosshairs of his gun sight. He was the one who pulled the trigger, the one who sent death hurtling across the battlefield. The first time he fired the main gun as a gunner and saw the result through his scope, an enemy position erupting in fire and smoke, the reality of his new role hit him with full, sickening force. The abstract chaos of combat became intensely personal. But in the brutal binary logic of war, there was no room for hesitation or contemplation. Killing became a grim mathematical equation of them or us, a simple matter of survival. His new crew pushed onward, a relentless advance across France and into Belgium. The 3rd Armoured Division was a key part of the operation to encircle a massive force of retreating German soldiers at Mons, a major victory for the Allies that resulted in the capture of some 25,000 German troops. But the life of a tanker was a schizophrenic mix of high-intensity terror and long, agonizing periods of tense waiting, constantly scanning the horizon, every tree line, every window of every building, for the telltale sign of danger. Walter's second brush with death came not with the flash and bang of a shell, but with the jarring, earth-shattering finality of a mine. His tank was advancing when an enormous explosion from directly below lifted the entire 33-ton vehicle into the air. It had rolled directly over a powerful German anti-tank mine, likely a telemine, packed with over 11 pounds of high explosive. The blast, designed to break a tank's track and suspension, tore through the Sherman's underbelly, destroying the running gear and sending a shockwave through the hull. The crew was thrown around the inside of the compartment like dice in a cup. Dazed and disoriented, they knew in an instant that they were a sitting duck, a crippled and immobile target, just waiting for enemy artillery or another tank to finish them off. The order was given, sharp and urgent. Bail out. One by one, they scrambled out of the hatches, acutely aware that the very earth they now stood on was likely seeded with more explosives, including the infamous Bouncing Betty anti-personnel mines. They moved cautiously, every footfall a gamble, their hearts pounding in their chests. Almost immediately, machine gun fire zipped past them. Walter recalled hearing the distinct, terrifying zip, zip, zip of bullets passing his ears as he and his commander sprinted for the nearest ditch. Once again, Walter had survived the complete destruction of his tank, but the psychological toll, the invisible weight of these experiences was mounting. He had now lost two of the steel homes he was supposed to trust, two separate crews torn apart by the violence of the war. The constant, unrelenting exposure to death and destruction, a condition the army was beginning to understand as battle fatigue, was a silent, insidious wound that afflicted countless soldiers. Yet the war demanded more. For the second time, Walter was assigned to a replacement tank, his reputation as a survivor growing with each incident. As the golden autumn of 1944 gave way to a bitterly cold and wet winter, the Allied advance began to slow and stall against stiffening German resistance near the border of the Reich itself. The worst, however, was yet to come. In the snow-covered, dense forests of the Ardennes, Hitler was preparing one last, desperate, and massive gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, under the cover of thick fog and miserable weather that grounded Allied air power, the German army launched a massive surprise offensive through the weakly held Ardennes forest sector, catching the Allies completely off guard. The attack punched a huge bulge into the American lines, giving the epic battle its name. The 3rd Armored Division, which had been fighting in the Hürtgen forest area, was rushed south to help contain the German breakthrough. Walter and his crew were thrown into some of the most vicious and desperate fighting of the entire war, in brutal winter conditions, with heavy snow, freezing rain, and sub-zero temperatures that tested men and machines to their absolute limits. Walter's unit found itself pitted against some of the most fanatical and well-equipped German forces, including elements of the notorious 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. In this sector of the Bulge, the fighting was merciless. After news spread of atrocities like the Malmedy massacre, where SS troops had machine-gunned scores of unarmed American POWs, the unofficial understanding on the front lines was that no quarter would be given to these SS units in return. The German offensive was spearheaded by powerful Tiger II heavy tanks whose thick frontal armor and potent 88mm guns vastly outmatched the standard M4 Shermans. American tankers had to rely on superior numbers, flanking maneuvers that were incredibly risky, and sheer, raw courage to stand a chance. The psychological pressure was immense and unrelenting. The constant threat from the superior German tanks, the hidden anti-tank guns, and the ever-present danger of Panzerfaust teams created an atmosphere of pure dread. Walter later recalled the profound difficulty of engaging the enemy, especially when he looked through his gun sight and saw very young German soldiers, some who looked to be barely teenagers, conscripted in the final, desperate days of the Third Reich. It was a stark, brutal reminder of the human cost of the conflict, a cost paid by the young on both sides. In early January 1945, during a fierce, grinding engagement in a small, rubble-strewn Belgian village, Walter Stitt's incredible luck seemed to finally run out. His Sherman was maneuvering cautiously, providing fire support for a squad of 8 terrified young infantrymen who were on their very first day of combat. As the tank rumbled through the shattered streets, a German soldier suddenly darted out from a hidden position in a bombed-out building, shouldering a Panzerfaust, a simple, disposable, but lethally effective anti-tank rocket launcher. The first rocket screamed past the tank with a fiery hiss, missing the Sherman, but exploding with a sickening crump among the terrified infantrymen, killing several of them instantly. Before the horrified tank crew could even traverse the turret to engage, the German soldier fired again. This time, the rocket found its mark. It slammed into the turret of Walter's Sherman with a violent concussive impact. The shaped charge warhead of the Panzerfaust penetrated the armor, and the interior of the turret became an instantaneous hell of flying shrapnel and superheated incandescent gas. The tank commander, Sergeant John Fasula, who was standing exposed in the hatch, was killed instantly. His body was thrown forward by the force of the blast, collapsing directly on top of Walter in the gunner's seat below. Pinned beneath his fallen commander, with the tank rapidly filling with thick, choking smoke and the terrifying glow of a nascent fire, Walter fought frantically to get free. He managed to push his way out from under Sergeant Fasula's body and scrambled desperately for an escape hatch. As he bailed out of the stricken tank, he was met with a hail of small arms fire from German infantry hidden in the ruins. He ran for the cover of a nearby woods, bullets snapping at his heels. It was only when he reached the relative safety of the trees that he realized he was wounded. He put a hand to his head, and it came away wet and red. His head was bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds. This was the third time. The third tank destroyed from under him. The third time he had crawled from a burning, mangled wreck, while his comrades lay dead or dying beside him. A doctor who later examined him at an aid station assessed his condition bluntly. Beyond the physical wounds, he was suffering from severe, acute battle fatigue. The physical wounds were treatable, but the psychological damage was deep and undeniable. The United States Army finally decided that Corporal Walter Stitt Jr. had endured enough. His combat days were over. After being wounded in action in Belgium, Walter was evacuated from the front lines, a journey that took him from the chaos of the battlefield to the quiet, sterile world of military hospitals. The shrapnel wounds to his head marked the definitive end of his time in a Sherman tank. He was eventually sent back to England to recover, spending the final months of the war far from the direct, daily threat of combat. For a soldier who had lived on a razor's edge for months, where every second was a negotiation with death, the sudden quiet and safety must have been a jarring, surreal transition. He carried with him 2 Purple Hearts, the physical emblems of the blood he had shed for his country. But the deepest, most profound wounds were the ones no one could see. The memories of the 3 times his world had exploded. The concussive force, the searing heat, the faces of the men who died beside him. These were the burdens he would carry for the rest of his life. The immense psychological toll of surviving so much destruction, a condition military doctors were only just beginning to truly understand and label as combat fatigue, had reached its zenith in him. Walter had reached the absolute limit of what a soldier could be expected to endure. Like so many veterans of his generation, Walter rarely spoke about his wartime experiences for decades after returning home. The horrors were often too painful to recount, too traumatic to put into words for those who had not been there. He had written countless letters home to his mother throughout the war, but they were a carefully curated, censored version of his life, filled with reassurances and optimistic platitudes that deliberately omitted the terrifying, day-to-day details of his existence. Unbeknownst to him, his mother saved every single letter, numbering them and storing them in a hatbox, a testament to the love and ever-present worry that connected the home front to the battlefront. It was only much later in his long life that Walter began to open up, sharing his story so that future generations might understand the true, unvarnished cost of war. He spoke of his quiet pride in having done his duty, of serving his country in its time of greatest need. He also shared poignant, human memories, like the overwhelming, indescribable sense of relief and pure, unadulterated celebration on VE Day, when the news finally came that the war in Europe was over. His service did not go unrecognized. In addition to his 2 Purple Hearts, he was eventually awarded the French Legion of Honor, France's highest distinction, for his role in the liberation of that nation. After the war, he built a new life for himself. Using the GI Bill, he attended Wittenberg University and graduated from Hammer School of Theology, becoming a Lutheran pastor and dedicating the rest of his life to serving communities in Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. It was a life of peace, faith, and quiet service, a stark and powerful contrast to the unimaginable violence of his youth. Walter Stitt Jr.'s story is a powerful and humbling reminder of the individual courage and incredible sacrifice that defined an entire generation. Countless stories like his, filled with breathtaking bravery and heartbreaking loss, still lie hidden in old letters, faded photographs, and the quiet corners of family histories. By remembering these heroes, by sharing their stories, we keep their legacy of service and sacrifice alive for generations to come. The story of Walter Stitt Jr. is far more than just a tale of improbable survival. It is a visceral window into the soul of a tanker in World War II. It reveals the claustrophobic terror of fighting from within a steel box, the immense psychological weight of being both a constant target and a dealer of death, and the quiet, unyielding resilience of the human spirit. He cheated death 3 times, emerging from fire and wreckage to fight another day, until the war itself finally seemed to decide that he had given enough. His life after the war, one of devoted service and deep faith, stands as a powerful testament to his character. He carried the unseen scars of his experiences, as all combat veterans do, but he did not let them define or consume him. Instead, he seemed to transform his pain and trauma into a quiet strength, living a full and meaningful life while always honoring the memory of those who did not return. Walter's story forces us to look beyond the grand strategies and the sweeping arrows on battle maps and to focus on the individual, the young man from West Virginia who was asked to do the impossible and somehow, against all odds, did. His survival was a matter of inches and seconds, a miraculous fluke of fate in a world that had gone utterly mad. But his legacy is one of enduring, unassuming bravery.